This is Whiskey Whereabouts. I'm Tim, and it's Valentine's Day. Got me thinking about first loves, right? First Scotch whiskey loves. The first bottle that really appreciated, the one that opened the doors to Scotch whiskey for you. For me, it was this bottle, Glenlivet 12 year. So in honor of Valentine's Day, I decided to invite this bottle onto the channel to see if there's still any chemistry between us, or to see how far we've grown apart. My whiskey journey has taken me to Scotland and back. I've explored whiskey education, tastings, and distilleries from Islay to Speyside. And now my journey continues here, with you, on Whiskey Whereabouts. So I have a pour opening up here of the Glenlivet 12 in this Glenlivet branded Copita that I brought back from the distillery, but this is not how I met this whiskey. This is how I knew this whiskey. In a tumbler on the rocks, and let me tell you, it's been a long time since I really sort of paid attention to this whiskey, and definitely since I had it like this, but nosing, or should I say attempting to nose this whiskey with all this ice at this temperature is one of those things I've talked about on the channel before, that immediate, that sort of Proustian or ratatouille sort of transports you back in time. And just taking a sip of this, there's little more to this at this temperature, already watered down by the ice, beyond apple vanilla honey. But it was enough. It was enough to distinguish the Glenlivet 12 and Scotch whiskey on a larger scale from other spirits. So in preparation for this video, I polled my subscribers, I polled my followers on Instagram, and asked to identify the bottle that sort of holds that place that this one holds for me, sort of the first love, the one that opened things up for them. And I got a lot of different responses. There is a bit of a consensus at the top. I got a lot of responses from lots of different bottles that I would not have expected. One vote each. Some big peated things, everything from Wee Beastie to Lefroy quarter casks, some of the more approachable stuff, Arran 10, Balvenie 12 year. I got some Bunnahabhains identified, everything from independent Bunnahabhains up to the cask strength. But the sort of consensus begins with sort of a tie. I have a sort of a gap here, about 5 whiskeys that received multiple votes. Benromach 15 is among these whiskeys. Glenmorangie used to be the 10. The Talisker 10 year. That makes sense. Macallan 12 year as the sort of first gateway Scotch whiskey, which makes sense to me when I think about it. And that is where I found the Glenlivet 12 year. This was a little less popular choice than I expected, given my experience with it. A little bit more votes and just sort of next level up. Lefroy 10 year, a whiskey I definitely expected to be on this list. I sort of bunched together all the responses from different blends as the sort of gateways, Chivas and Johnny Walker and Buchanan's and this type. We had 2 whiskeys in second place, peated whiskeys, Ardbeg 10 year and Lagavulin 16 year. And Lagavulin 16 year we think of as a big smoky whiskey, but I think what it's got going for it as a sort of entry point is certainly not its price anymore, but it's everywhere. And 43%, it's chill filtered. It doesn't come on as strong as something else might, but the winner, with a couple extra votes here, distancing itself, is the sort of alternative to this bottle. It is the Glenfiddich 12 year, and it was the most popular selection of all of the bottles that were identified. Makes sense. I think that Glenfiddich and Glenlivet 12 year are so prevalent. They are so everywhere. They're so similar that as far as unpeated whiskeys go, I think of them as the entry points. When you think of peated whiskey, Lefroy 10 year is everywhere, so I think a lot of people start with that. I have said on the channel for a while that I think Ardbeg 10 is a much better first peated whiskey than Lefroy 10. It's a better whiskey, it's better presented, and that sharp sort of medicinal Lefroy 10 quality can put people off of peated whiskey. And it looks like that is bearing out, that a lot of people are finding the Ardbeg 10 before the Laphroaig 10, even though it's a little harder, at least here in the US. Turning to the Glenlivet 12-year, I do remember a time when I first started trying whiskey before it was as prevalent or as sort of ubiquitous as it is now. There were just fewer selections. And in the US, I still think this is true, that Glenmorangie, it's around, but it's not quite everywhere the way that the Glenlivet and the Glenfiddich 12 years are. These bottles are on every shelf. They're on every restaurant, every bar, every shop. And so availability, ubiquity, was certainly part of how I got into the Glenlivet 12 year as sort of a gateway whiskey. But the Glenfiddich is just as available, and I just lean toward this one. I think of this whiskey, and I'm going to get into it, but I just from memory think of this whiskey coming into this as a little bit fruit, a little more fruit, a little bit richer. I think of the Glenfiddich as a little bit crisper. This is more apple, the Glenfiddich a little bit more pear, a little bit more casky, a little bit more oaky on the Glenfiddich. And so sort of very, very early, I would say before the journey even started level, that sort of was appealing to me. And so I leaned toward this. And, you know, I still think I prefer the Glenfiddich spirit, the Glenlivet spirit to the Glenfiddich. I've been to both distilleries. I've had the sort of, you know, flashy kind of higher end tastings. I've enjoyed this spirit, really enjoy it when it's presented well. There's a really good selection of single cask whiskeys available in the visitor center at Glenlivet, a beautiful visitor center, by the way. And now I'm going to find out how it holds up in this form, the form that we all know and are unimpressed with. What we're looking at here is 40% ABV whiskey that's chill filtered with fake color added. It's bourbon and ex-sherry cask matured Speyside whiskey. And I'm going to go in now on the nose with the Glenlivet 12-year neat. So on the neck pour here, this, you know, trying to nose this, I kind of made a note to myself of what nose, where is it? It's not non-existent, especially if you just had time to open up past the neck pour. You see where we're at. And here I've been talking a little bit, let this 12-year open up nicely here to do this tasting here and nosing this. It's certainly not complicated and it's certainly not overpowering, but there is some really nice flavor here. And what are those flavor notes? Well, to start with, it's the same dominant notes that I was talking about when I had my rocks pour out here. Apple, so much apple, so much vanilla and honey. That's the sort of first wave that comes at you. It's that vanilla honey sweet, pretty nice, very bourbon notey, right? Very, very bourbon cask. Then we have another sort of level with the fruit. Neck pours, it was more that pear, and the pear is certainly still here, but now there's almost a tropical sort of fruit element to it, which is nice. There's an orange, maybe, as well. Sweet, crisp. The bottom is kind of a kind of a toffee. That vanilla honey is kind of condensing into that sweetness. Nothing off. There's nothing inoffensive in this bottle. On the palate, okay, so this is not much of a mouthfeel. Not with these specs. It sort of has a sort of diluted syrup, watered down kind of feel to it. But the flavors are pretty rich. They're the same flavors that were on the nose. This is not a whiskey that has anything up its sleeve. It's not going to surprise you. It keeps its promises. What was there in the nose carries over. And it's almost identical list of sort of flavors. That real sort of dominant vanilla note, that apple note, a little bit of that pear, some of that sweetness. Again, a lot of sort of crisp, orchard fruit, Speyside flavors that we associate with the distillation primarily, and a lot of bourbon cask notes. I'm not talking about baking spice. I'm not talking about, dried fruit here. I'm not giving you a lot of, there isn't a very strong sherry influence here in this whiskey. What I am getting is a nice sort of round, rich, sort of vanilla creamy kind of sweetness wrapped around that orchard fruit. It's not something that, grabs your attention, but it's quite pleasant. I'm not in any way put off by the flavor. This whiskey is the definition of not too much. But to me, there's something nice about these simple, rich flavors. On the palate, it's shortish medium. It is the best stage of the 3 stages of this whiskey, and that goes a long way. I think with a whiskey that's sort of not overwhelming, it doesn't lose control or balance. We've introduced a nice casky element, though. There's a little bit of the sort of bitter oak spice coming in for the first time here on this finish. A lot of the same elements again, but I would say that the sweetness, that vanilla creamy kind of sweetness has kind of really deepened a little bit, almost into a chocolate sweetness here, with those offsetting, nice sort of orchard kind of fruit elements, with just enough of that cask presence to give it a little depth and to offset it so it's not too sweet. Yeah, it's instead of vanilla honey, it's chocolate caramel now. Now this is the part of the video where I usually take out this glass and I add water. And the reason that I do this is in case we can unlock some new flavor elements in the whiskey by adding the water. And sometimes, depending on the ABV, to kind of test drive to see how sippable is it with the water. And I'm not going to bother, because adding water to this whiskey is a complete waste of time. It's 40% chill filtered whiskey that has nothing more to offer. We've covered it. I added the water. It was pointless. It just washed everything out and added nothing. So how do I rate this whiskey? Well, we have a history. I will say this. I fully intend to finish this bottle. I got the half-size bottle for the review. I just think it's a perfectly fine, simple, sweet, nothing off, nothing challenging whiskey to pour and have a, while you're watching the game, warm weather's coming. I can definitely see sort of chipping away at this bottle without, having to pay it too close attention in terms of unpacking it. It's a very simple whiskey, and it does the thing that it promises to do. To me, I think of this in Glenfiddich, depending on how you adjust a couple of the sort of levels of the emphasis on the different flavors, it's the sort of foundational idea of what I think of as sort of Speyside whiskey. I know that's an unusual point of view. This is a 2.75 glass whiskey in the glass. And what about when we consider value? Well, it's not that simple. This whiskey has a price tag that's all over the place. It's everywhere. There's so many different places where you can get it, so the price fluctuates wildly. And I've seen it for less than $40, and I've seen it for more than $50. And that's a big range for a whiskey this simple to be in, and those prices would have totally different ratings in consideration. I find that it usually costs a couple dollars more than the Glenfiddich. What are you looking for as alternatives in this price category? Probably the Glenmorangie, now the 12, Old Pulteney 12-year. If you're at a little bit better stock shop, you've got some non-age statement alternatives that are well presented but don't have the years. Non-age statement Bunnahabhain, Orchard House, that's blended malt, non-age statement but nicely presented. That's the sort of price sort of category that we are in. And at more than $50, there's just more out there. But in the range of about $40 for the 750 ml bottle, it's not a whiskey I buy anymore, and it is a just terrible presentation. But for what it does and its sort of simple sort of purpose to sip or even to mix, $40 isn't unreasonable relative to what else is on the shelf in that price category. So I'm just going to leave it. This is obviously, the more expensive this goes, the lower that rating would go. But I'm just going to leave it at the same rating for the 2.75 final rating for the Glenlivet 12. So if you enjoyed this video where I got to revisit my first Scotch whiskey love, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the future videos that are coming, and I will see you on the next one.